Episode 2, the BBC's deployment of Stonewall's Ally Scheme and the Workplace Equality Index. No drama! Big drama! Revelation!
Call 03030 80 55 55.
You seem very reluctant to get down into the detail of this story.
Nolan Show is a daily radio show on Radio Ulster. We do investigative journalism, hard-hitting politics. It's also the biggest programme in Northern Ireland.
No. As a leader of this country, why don't you take responsibility?
Stephen is a force of nature. He basically doesn't take any crap from anyone.
Do you withdraw that remark, or are you standing over it?
Loud, aggressive, talented. He does call things as he sees them.
I'm telling you! I'm telling you! We have all the money more often than not. All these Anyway.
What's different about it is we allow the public to have their say. So no matter what story we do, people phone in and give their view.
We physically fought to stay within the United Kingdom. When you have Sinn Féin the alliance...
No!
Yeah, I felt like I was from a drug cartel.
Your leggings were bleeping. What did you do your leggings?
You know what you are? You are a swinger.
Stop putting politics before people.
It's a platform for people in Northern Ireland to talk to people in power.
Minister, it's not surely a private matter for us, the public, to know.
And that's because we do stories that people care about. People know that they can have their say alongside the politicians and alongside the experts.
I have to go here because I'm actually at work.
The reason why we get away with doing the programme we do is that we stick to the BBC editorial guidelines really tightly, and Stephen's obsessed with them. As long as we stick to the guidelines, then the gloves are off.
That's not the question. That you said something an hour ago. Are you standing over it? It's the best job in the world, and I really mean that. It's an incredible job. To be able to come into the BBC and have the might and the authority and the resources and the passion that the BBC has, and to therefore be given an opportunity to fight for that ordinary punter. That's my typical day. So there's an ordinary punter that has a brick wall put up against them. There's an ordinary punter that's been ignored for years. And my typical day is fighting for them to get answers. I absolutely love it.
Right, so we're going to phone Stephen. It's our first and only meeting of the day, and it's not what you might imagine a BBC meeting would sound like, to be honest.
Hello?
Morning.
Oh, it's a beautiful morning, Ross. Sun is shining. We've got the Audit Office report, which is clearly our lead.
Every day, Stephen has another idea. Some of the stuff he wants to do, you would never hear pitched in a normal BBC meeting, never mind actually make it on air. This is a perfect example.
A lot of Stonewall's work remains below the radar.
Ex-Stonewall Chief Executive Baroness Ruth Hunt.
So my social media, you won't tell from my social media who I've had meetings with. I will never go, here's me with a minister and this is what we've discussed.
Well, there's a lot around, isn't there, at the moment about BBC impartiality, and that's why this story that we're doing, investigating Stonewall, is so important, because there are questions for public institutions, including the BBC, as to are they treating Stonewall like everybody else without fear or favour? Can the BBC actually look at how it has treated Stonewall and say we've given them no better or no worse treatment than anybody else?
You have one new message. BBC response to FOI request on Stonewall.
Right, so if I want to go down here, update Stephen on the latest FOI back in today, which is extraordinary, to be honest.
So, here's what the BBC's done. First of all, they were out of time by how many weeks? The Nolan Show wanted to know if there had been any conversations or deals or arrangements between the BBC and Stonewall behind the scenes. How is the BBC not compromised if on the one hand it is trying to win approval from Stonewall and climb up its Equality Index league table and being marked by Stonewall, while at the same time needing to have enough editorial independence to investigate it? Will the BBC fall down that league table, for example, because of our podcast? Did Stonewall have any role in the creation of our new LGBT and gender identity correspondent jobs? Here's a question Is the language the BBC uses BBC language or Stonewall's recommended language? We've been digging for this information for months. Way back in December 2020, we got a knockback from the BBC.
And no response.
So they should have replied certainly by the end of October, and that's given them even more time than they were allowed.
Yeah.
Right? So all of November, and then in the middle of December, they write back and essentially say no.
Yeah. They've carried out a public interest test and decided it's not in the public interest to release this information.
Well, is it not in the public interest or is it not in the BBC's interest? Two distinctly different things.
Well, it's been in the public interest for every other organisation that we've gone to who have released information. Maybe small redactions around personal information, but they've given us the information. The BBC have taken a completely different approach from everybody else.
So the BBC has been the least open and transparent of anybody we've sent an FOI
Absolutely.
to.
There's no other organisation that's just said, no, you can't have this. So we've went to governments, we've went to arm's length bodies linked to governments or public bodies. Nobody has said no. I mean, the Northern Ireland Civil Service tried to redact a bit, we appealed it, and then they changed their mind. They used the commercial interest argument to redact some scores on the Workplace Equality Index. The BBC had refused to release any of it. Basically, it's the conversations between them and Stonewall every year. But, you have to look at the relationship between the BBC and Stonewall in this and how this started. Because the reason we're doing this podcast was because I saw something on the BBC staff website which made me think, well, where's that coming from? So there was a statement on their page which said, it was about the BBC Ally Scheme. You know about the Ally Scheme. And this one line struck me. Interventions made by non-LGBTQ plus people, as they are not done out of self-interest, can have a greater impact than if raised by LGBTQ plus staff themselves.
So here we have the BBC issuing a UK-wide initiative across the organisation. And is it a coincidence that it was taken from a Stonewall policy document?
Hello everyone, I'm James Pennell. I am the sponsor of the LGBTQ plus workstream. We spoke to lots of you, and one of the suggestions that came back was to have an allies programme. We worked with Stonewall on the review, and they emphasised that as well.
What critical thinking was there within the BBC before it recommended straight staff would wear badges indicating that they were available to speak on behalf of LGBT people because, quote, they can have a greater impact? Can you imagine if you were saying to a woman, we're going to get a man to speak on your behalf because they might be listened to more?
Yeah, exactly what they said, right, was interventions made by non-LGBTQ plus people, because that's the BBC's new term that they use, as they are not done out of self-interest, can have a greater impact than if raised by LGBTQ plus staff themselves. I mean, so I asked where the evidence was for this, because it's quite a big claim. It also sounds quite outdated, to be honest.
Really? Sorry, they've told gay people what?
I think that's really quite cheeky. People are people in my eyes.
That just does not make me comfortable.
Yeah, nah.
Why do we need to be represented by straight people if we're gay? Can we not represent ourselves?
I don't think it's really fair. Being gay doesn't, change anything about you as a person. Doesn't change, your personality or your beliefs or anything. So I don't see why you need to be represented by anyone, never mind a straight person.
I think it's probably maybe more about giving LGBT people the ability to kind of convey their own opinions, and because I think they can, they don't need a straight person to translate for them,
We can reveal for the first time why the BBC had driven this policy throughout the organisation. In an extraordinary twist, Stonewall has told us this was actually from an old document of theirs. Now, Thompson, how can you stand over that the BBC, rather than thinking for themselves, was actually taking a policy just because they thought it was Stonewall's, and farcically, it wasn't?
So whenever I asked the BBC manager, which is the diversity and inclusion department you'll hear a lot about in this podcast, responded to me saying, the statement you're querying has been taken directly from Stonewall, who, as you'll be aware, I'm sure, work with most large employers and from their experience have produced an Allies Guide for employers.
So the BBC are not explaining to you, when you're asking them why the policy is logical or how it's logical, they're just automatically defaulting to, well, Stonewall like it, so therefore we like it.
Yeah, they've basically cited Stonewall, and I put it to them that perhaps the thing to do then was, when they're telling BBC staff about this, it should be attributed to Stonewall rather than the BBC.
Yeah, but that's a little bit of a red herring for what I'm talking about here, which is, here you have a policy throughout this organisation, the BBC, and when we ask the BBC to tell us why it is the right thing for the BBC automatically defaults back to, well, Stonewall have told us it's right.
Yeah, and that's
the danger in just defaulting back to, well, Stonewall have told us, is that actually Stonewall didn't like this policy anymore. And yet here it was in modern day BBC.
And that's where it comes down to the key line, where in an attempt to defend using this line, they say, the BBC's position is that we accept that Stonewall, as the experts in workplace equality for LGBTQ plus people, work with most large employers, and what is true there is likely to be true at the BBC.
That is a huge statement. That's one of the biggest statements of this podcast. So in that one line, that's that manager from the BBC emphatically stating Stonewall are, quote, the experts.
And it literally says the BBC's position is that we accept that Stonewall as the experts in workplace equality for LGBTQ plus people. The BBC's position is that Stonewall are the experts.
Here's Benjamin Cohen, CEO of Pink News.
I'm not sure of whether what you're actually describing is a problem with Stonewall or a problem with the BBC with outdated policies and advice.
Can you imagine the furor that there would be if someone was running around wearing a badge saying, I'm a white person, I will speak on your behalf, black man, because I will be listened to more than you? Can you imagine how insulting that is?
See, I'm agreeing with you, so I don't agree with that. It seems actually quite insulting.
Well, if you take that out of it, what does the Allies... Because Stonewall promote ally schemes in lots of organisations, but what does that achieve?
An ally scheme is something different, though. So I don't like this, I'll be your voice because I'm a cisgender straight person that will advocate for you, because that diminishes the voice of LGBT people. Then that's
like, if anybody ever in this world tries to speak on my behalf, no matter what I am, I'll tell them to off. I'll speak for myself.
What happens if you ask them to advocate for you?
That's completely different.
Yeah, but isn't that... So sometimes ally schemes are about knowing people who are willing to offer help, support, advice. So that is a slightly different issue.
It's only anecdotal, Benjamin, because obviously I haven't, we don't have exact numbers here, but I don't, like, for example, I look around in my workplace and I don't know, of the gay people I know, I don't know many of them who are involved in the Allies schemes or the networks. Like, is it helpful to LGBT people, full stop, to have these schemes? Like, are they actually advancing?
I wouldn't say that they're unhelpful. So it depends on the context. So in a large employer, it's probably a good thing to have some sort of scheme. And it's also a way about including people. So for allies to feel part of things like Pride and things like that. So I think broadly, it's a positive. I definitely can't see that as a negative.
Well, here's a possible negative. If you've only got one ally scheme within the organisation, and there are gay people who happen to disagree with that particular thrust of that particular ally scheme, is this not just homogenising gay people as if they all think in the one way?
I'm not sure it is. I think that you can choose, if you're LGBT, whether you want to participate in something. You might choose not. If an employer has an LGBT plus network, or have I don't know, the BBC is called LGBTQ plus network, you might choose not to be part of it for personal reasons.
The BBC wouldn't put anybody up from the Diversity and Inclusion Department for interview, nor would they put anybody else up from within the entire organisation. This is an organisation which actually exists on the basis that people come and answer questions. When it was a question about the BBC, absolutely nobody available. The BBC did not directly answer all of the specific questions we put to them. Instead, they issued the following statement from a BBC spokesperson.
The BBC acts independently in all our aspects of our operations, from HR policy to editorial guidelines and content. We aim to be industry leading on workforce inclusion and take advice from a range of external organisations. However, we make the final decision on any BBC policies or practices ourselves. We are not a member of Stonewall, we do not take legal advice from Stonewall, and we do not subscribe to Stonewall's campaigning. The charity simply provides advice that we are able to consider. As a broadcaster, we have our own values and editorial standards. These are clearly set out and published in our editorial guidelines. We are also governed by the Royal Charter and the Ofcom Broadcasting Code.
On the 30th of January 2020, the BBC told all its staff that they were
really pleased Stonewall have recognised the work we have been doing over the last year to advance LGBTQ+ inclusion at the BBC.
The BBC went even further, telling all its staff just how much of an intimate relationship it had with this controversial lobby group.
We will be working closely with Stonewall over the coming months in preparation for next year's index.
Can the BBC name any other lobby group which it would be
working closely
with? We feel it's in the public interest to disclose to you what staff in the BBC are being told within a BBC Allies training meeting. We think we have enough evidence to ask a question as to whether the BBC's training behind the scenes, because the public don't get to see this, is biased. Now, is the bias apparent when the BBC's training is using a gender-bred person to give its staff one particular view on sex and gender? How's this not biased? Because some groups like LGBT Alliance, for example, fundamentally reject the whole premise that is portrayed in the gender-bred person. And yet the BBC's using it in their training. None of the LGBT alliances or other people who object to it, none of that is discussed. Let's have a listen.
Okay, next slide, please. So this is what's called the gender-bred person. So this is quite a nice way of explaining gender. And it can help us understand a bit more about it visually. If you look at gender identity, so that points at the brain. And this is how we, in our heads, define our gender. And it is based on how much we align, or don't align, with what we understand to be the options for gender. It means that it doesn't always correlate with sex that we are assigned at birth. So if I go on to biological sex, this is the physical sexual characteristic you're born with. Though this could include your genitalia, your body shape, your hormones, so that it's very much the biological side. And then expression. This is the line that goes around the whole of the gender-bred person. So expression is the way we sort of present our gender. So this would be our actions, the way we dress, our mannerisms, and how we sort of interpret those against gender norms.
What is the gender-bred person, Thompson?
Gender-bred person is, I wouldn't describe it as a meme, but it's like it's a graphic that's been used by different organisations like Stonewall, and it's literally like a gingerbread man, but it's called a gender-bred person, and it points to different parts of this gender-bred person, and it talks about the identity that's in the brain, the attractions in the heart. On the external, there's gender expression and sex, and it gives definitions of how these things are spectrums.
So where's the disagreement on that? Why would anybody disagree with a gender-bred person?
Well, if you're like the LGBT Alliance and you don't believe that gender identity is real, that it's a real tangible thing, then you wouldn't agree with staff in organisations being told, actually, everyone's got this gender identity.
Why are we talking about this? Ring up the LGBT Alliance. Who's the boy from there? He's a guy, we've spoken to him before. Malcolm Clark, is it?
Yeah.
Ring up Malcolm.
Malcolm, how are you? Malcolm, have you seen this online graphic of the gender-bred person?
I have indeed. It's become infamous.
And what do you make of it? What's your position on the message within it, essentially?
I mean, it's ridiculous. I mean, it basically is telling children and teachers that everyone has a gender identity. If you look at it in detail, it contains complete nonsense. I mean, at one stage, I think the last time I looked at it, it said that Some people are born male or female. 99.99% of people are born male or female. It's absolutely absurd. We don't believe people have gender identities. We believe that the vast majority of people are male or female 100%. If they weren't, the human species would have disappeared long ago.
How would you feel, Malcolm, if the BBC was using that genderbread person as part of training for wider staff?
I mean, if that was true, it would be appalling. It would suggest that an institution that is known across the world for the quality of its factual television had somehow allowed idiots to take over its own internal education.
Well, now, you're being pejorative. You're describing people as idiots. I'm trying to keep this respectful, and this is about BBC impartiality, giving you and them a fair crack of the whip.
Yes, but I mean, unfortunately, if the BBC doesn't realise that 99.9% of human beings are biologically male or female, and if they're teaching inside the BBC that that's not true, okay, I would say it was an idiotic thing to teach. Maybe the people who are doing it aren't idiots, but the content is idiotic. And any science producer within the BBC who's worth their salt will tell you that.
Okay, pretty clear, Malcolm. I think we know where you stand on that one.
Thanks very much.
Okay.
Cheers. Bye-bye. Bye. So that's what we're talking about. The debates around sex and gender is what this is all about. Stonewall on one side of that, there's the other side of it, and yet the genderbread person is being used in training sessions in the BBC.
Undisputed, unchallenged.
Yeah, there was no other perspective given in that training session. And why would there be? Because when ally schemes were set up, they're set up with training from Stonewall.
Thompson!
You answering? I thought you were ignoring me there.
Well, I'm on this stupid road where the signal keeps on cutting out.
Oh, great.
And this is one of these mobile phone companies that said there's 100% coverage.
Here, have you seen the Workplace Equality Index?
What do you make of it?
Let me see if I'm getting this right. Stonewall have created a league table, and all of these companies around the UK are trying to climb up this league table in order to say to the public that you're LGBTQ friendly, right?
Yeah, it's like a stamp of approval to say, look, we're really good for LGBT employees. So some of the documents we're getting in, we're seeing like public bodies who are setting it as one of their goals, their strategies to get further up the league table. Now, there's one way you can get further up the league table, and that's to do things that Stonewall want you to do. Stonewall are a charity, but they're also a lobby group. And they're a lobby group that have controversial positions on certain things that lots of those public sector employees might disagree with.
The BBC is keen to climb up that league table. In the same way that the BBC would be asking itself very, very serious questions if it was trying to climb up some type of league table that the Conservative Party had created. The top 100 organisations that the Tories like, the top 100 organisations that the Labour Party thinks are good companies in the UK. The BBC would run a mile from that. They would go nowhere near it because it would question their impartiality. So how on earth are they in a situation where they're publicly, openly saying they want to impress Stonewall?
Or like a women's rights group. And like you can imagine the mess they would get themselves into with that if they picked one group over another, because obviously every group has different lobby names and different policies that they pursue. And there's this kind of presumption that all lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender people must think like Stonewall if they think that Stonewall are the people that can fairly judge all of this.
But if the BBC is de facto accepting that Stonewall are the experts, then in order to get up Stonewall's little chart of ranking, then they've got to do what Stonewall tells them.
Yeah.
How is that healthy for the BBC? What about the other lobby groups on behalf of gay rights that disagree with Stonewall? What about all of the gay people in this country who disagree with what Stonewall believe is in the interests of the gay people they represent.
Yeah.
Like, how is this healthy? The BBC didn't give us the documents we were asking for as part of our investigation. Those documents were the submissions they made to Stonewall to help them get up Stonewall's league table, in other words, that workplace equality index. But other organisations did, like the Northern Ireland Civil Service. The information on those documents was really interesting. We could see the scores Stonewall were giving out, and we could see Stonewall's feedback. And even more interestingly, we could see what Stonewall were trying to sell.
One bit that really stuck out for me was at the bottom of every page of feedback, they have offers. So civil servants could go to London to a conference, and the tickets are priced at $349 plus VAT. And
so, in a nutshell, Stonewall are marking the homework of all of these bodies and basically saying to them, well, look, you didn't do quite well enough to have that coveted place higher up our league table, but by the way, we will sell you courses so that you can climb up them.
Exactly.
Like, not only are the public bodies paying a lobby group to be marked by the lobby group, but then this lobby group is also saying, well, you're not doing well enough, pay us some money and we'll tell you how to get up higher next year.
How is there not an obvious conflict of interest insofar as if Stonewall were to mark a company immediately highly, then that company would not possibly need to buy courses from Stonewall, and therefore it would be at a financial disadvantage to Stonewall to mark someone immediately high. Now, whether that happens or not, we've no evidence, but it's the perception of this. We put this to Benjamin Cohen, CEO of Pink News, who says he is a critical friend of Stonewall. Sometimes perception is also what's important, and here's the reality. The reality is that organisations that surely should have their own momentum to do the right thing are farming that process out to Stonewall. And then what they're doing is they're being marked by a company who will sell them courses which will help them move further up that scheme. How is that not an obvious conflict of interest?
But I want to clarify, are the courses not to help employers improve the policies and the provision for LGBT staff within their organization?
From Stonewall's perspective.
Agreed.
Who are then marking them the next year on whether they should move up the league table?
No, I think it's too simplistic to assume that an employer would be paying purely for moving up a ranking. Maybe you have a different view, and obviously I'm an employer, and I guess you guys aren't.
Just a quick explainer. You'll hear a lot in this podcast about schemes run by Stonewall. There are two that we're looking at. First, there's the Diversity Champion Scheme. That's a scheme that organisations pay for, and Stonewall will provide support and advice for those organisations on staffing issues and diversity. Organisations can promote themselves as Stonewall Diversity Champions. And then secondly, there's the Workplace Equality Index. Now that's a public ranking of organisations, and there is no fee to enter. Organisations will submit evidence to Stonewall, and Stonewall will mark them on how they're doing on LGBTQ plus equality, according to Stonewall's criteria. That's the key. It's according to Stonewall's criteria. You don't have to pay to be in the Diversity Champion Scheme to apply to be publicly listed on the Workplace Equality Index. But what you do have to do is please Stonewall in order to be scored high enough to reach their top 100 list. Here's the Labour MP, Rosie Duffield.
A lot of organisations have left the Stonewall Champions scheme. We sort of hear more and more names added to that list every day. I mean, they'll say in public that, it was costing a lot of money, because that's another issue. If they're accountable to their customers and their shareholders, they've got to justify spending this amount of money on what is essentially a lobby group. And I think, to be fair to those companies, they probably did it in good faith. They probably thought, we're getting this equality and inclusion advice, and it's really great, and these people are champions. And if they're going on Stonewall's history of Of course, they've been a great campaigning organisation, but, this is lobbying at the end of the day.
Benjamin Cohen, CEO of Pink News. So how is it not a conflict of interest for the same company that is charging to train you to get a higher score, scores you in the first place?
I appreciate that, but there's actually quite a few private businesses that are doing activities not dissimilar, who also run lists of the top 100 executives, nothing to do with Stonewall, and there's lists, there's all sorts of...
But we're talking about Stonewall here.
No, I know, but what I'm saying is that those companies also offer training services, support services that are actually competitive to Stonewall. So the arena that Stonewall is operating in, that is actually quite competitive. So I am both a critic, I suppose, or like friendly critic of Stonewall, but we also, from a business perspective, we are offering not those services, but other things. For example, we run the Pink News Awards. Stonewall used to run the Stonewall Awards. At the time that they both existed, we were competing for both the same speakers and the same sponsors. So it's not that Stonewall has never been in this space where there is competitors, and it's not the only player in there. But I do accept...
It's the dominant player. This equality index, when you look at the type of companies that are trying to climb up that league table.
Yeah, I agree with that, but there's quite a lot of notable companies who have either climbed up the league table and then decided to no longer enter themselves because they feel that they are in a good position, or other companies who are quite notable in their absence. So if we think about some of the large American social media and digital media companies, they're not included in there, but we know that they have fantastic provisions for LGBT staff. So it's certainly not mandatory. I haven't actually checked the last one, but I don't believe, for example, like Google or Twitter were in there, but I know they have and Facebook, they have really good policies.
Let's take an example. The BBC is trying to climb up that league table.
Yeah, no, agreed. There is a legitimate question to say, does the BBC need to expend time on entering that? But as a license fee payer, I have a lot of questions about the things that the BBC decides to do. So,
but isn't that separate then?
No, I'm not sure it is. And the reason why I'm not sure it's separate, because being in the Stonewall Equality Index doesn't cost any money, but it does cost time. So if an organisation decides that it wants to spend its time doing that is kind of up to them. But
it does cost money to be part of the Diversity Champion scheme, which will help you go up the Workplace Equality Index, because that's where Stonewall will advise you, that they'll give you the policies that they think you should put in place.
Because the Equality Index is 100 companies, and on there 850 employers that are members of the Diversity Champion scheme. So you've only got a 1 in 8.5 chance of even being included if you're looking just on an odds perspective. So I'm not sure that they are actually saying that you can get up the index if you are paying them as a member, because if they are, it's not a very good deal, because the vast majority of the companies that are, of the organisations that are paying aren't on there.
The companies pay to be part of the Diversity Champion scheme, and then Stonewall give the advice, and then they're marked on whether or not they meet the criteria that Stonewall set out.
How many organisations are members of the Stonewall Diversity Champion scheme? I believe it's about 850, but there's 100 members, there's 100 places on the Workplace Equality Index. So what happens to the other 750 employers? So I'm saying that by joining one scheme doesn't mean you get on the other. And are you sure that every single one of the 100 employers who are on the Workplace Equality Index have paid?
But Stonewall rank those companies way beyond the 100. The 100's published.
No, I understand that, but the only ones that we see publicly are the top 100. And there are breakdowns. So they used to do like the top 10 banking and things like that. But the question I would ask, or I suggest journalistically one would want to look at, is there a direct correlation? So for example, I don't know. I haven't invested time. We certainly don't have the same resources as the BBC to be looking into things like this. Whether every single one of the 100 employers that are in the Workplace Equality Index, the last one, are actually paying Diversity Champion subscribers. If there's only 100 places that are public, it's just a mathematical impossibility that every member would be featured in the top 100.
Be that what may. The BBC did not make anyone from its diversity and inclusion department available for interview. They also didn't address a series of specific questions we asked them. They ducked the questions.
We are not a member of Stonewall, we do not take legal advice from Stonewall, and we do not subscribe to Stonewall's campaigning. the charity simply provides advice that we are able to consider.
Stonewall wouldn't put anyone up for interview. They didn't directly answer any of the 50 or more questions we asked them. Here's what they said in a statement.
At Stonewall, we're fighting for a world where all lesbian, gay, bi, trans and queer people are free to thrive as themselves. In 2021, we know that LGBTQ+ people are still held back because of who we are. Our research shows that more than a third, 35%, of LGBTQ+ people have hidden their identity at work for fear of discrimination. We also know that 1 in 5 LGBTQ+ staff, 18%, have been the target of negative comments or conduct from work colleagues in the last year because they are LGBTQ+. And 1 in 8 trans people, 12%, have been physically attacked by customers or colleagues in the last year for being trans. This situation is unacceptable, and we're incredibly proud to work with organisations around the world to better support their lesbian, gay, bi, trans and queer staff. Our guidance to employers supports them to understand the needs of their LGBTQ+ employees and create an inclusive workplace culture through their policies and wider activity. When it comes to inclusive workplace policies, our guidance follows the simple principles that workplace policies should apply to all employees, regardless of their gender or the gender of their partner, and they should use language that makes it clear to LGBTQ+ employees that they are included.
The research mentioned in Stonewall's response to the BBC was carried out by YouGov on behalf of Stonewall. LGBT people in England, Scotland and Wales took part in an online questionnaire. However, it did not include Northern Ireland.
Now, changes to the BBC licence fee will come into effect tomorrow. They were delayed from the 1st of June because of coronavirus.
The BBC, unlike any other major broadcaster in this country, is paid for directly by the public through a licence fee. If people are paying into an organisation like this through effectively a tax, of course those people are entitled to transparency about the arrangements that that organisation has, particularly when it's with a lobby group that's seen by many of those people as controversial.
The integrity of the licence fee is built upon every person that pays for it gets an impartial service from the BBC. That's why I believe this podcast is so important.
The real risk for the BBC in this is that there's, to some extent, it can be overplayed, but to some extent there's a bit of a culture war going on in the UK, which is not dissimilar to what's happened in America. And if people feel, or enough people feel, that the BBC is on one side of that debate, like you hear this allegation all the time that the BBC is woke. If we have close relationships with organisations like Stonewall, if we are paying money to them, how is that going to help the perception of our impartiality? Some people are going to think, well, yeah, they are woke. They will just associate us with Stonewall and everything Stonewall believe in. And it's always about the perception. Whether the reality is that the BBC has been massively influenced by Stonewall or not, the public's perception will be that the two organisations work together. It's just about trust and confidence in us as impartial broadcasters.
This is how impartial the BBC is. It is the licence fee paying for us to ask tough questions of the BBC. That's how impartial we are. We have the freedom to do so. We have the support of the BBC to do so. So when you're wondering if the BBC has intent on impartiality, every day of the week it does. But I guess we're just questioning whether that's being played out in actual practice with Stonewall. So, in this episode, we've just heard how the BBC pushed a Stonewall-inspired Allies programme in which they said straight people might be better listened to. But the twist was that it was from an old Stonewall document that even Stonewall said was outdated. We've heard how the BBC were trying to climb up Stonewall's index. And coming up in the next episode, we get to the heart of one of the most contested topics in the whole sex-gender debate, self-ID. Can a biological male suddenly declare themselves a woman with no process? And should non-binary people be recognised in law?